In August of 2019, my solar panels were activated for the very first time. About that time, I also installed a Sense home energy monitor. My reasoning for this is that the Enphase app that came with my solar system updated about every 15 minutes and only gave me a readout of what the solar panels were producing. It didn't show me what my home was using. I installed the Sense. I immediately saw some gains with it, and then I quickly realized not only was my solar system producing, but I was actually wasting energy everywhere. As soon as I could see exactly what my energy was being used on, I started making huge improvements within my household. I swapped out all of my incandescent bulbs for LEDs. I made some energy changing moves to shut off the in-floor heaters, to make sure lights were shut off, and different things like that. Had I known where my energy was going prior to this installation, I would have made these changes a long time ago. On this episode of Don't Burn the House Down, we're gonna make some sense out of Sense. Get it? We're gonna talk about what Sense is, where do you install it, how do you use the app, and then finally, the most recent update to the app. We're gonna cover the changes that they've made. If you already know what Sense is and how to install it, go ahead and skip ahead to this point in the video and we'll just talk about the current changes. So stick around, let's talk about electricity, solar panels, and home monitoring. And as always, don't burn the house down. Now hopefully it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway. If you don't know what you're doing when it comes to electricity, never ever ever touch your main panel. Leave the cover on and call a professional to do this installation for you. I am comfortable with electricity and I've been working with it for years, so this installation for me was relatively easy. But always be safe and never do something you're not comfortable with, especially when there's this many volts running through. The last thing you wanna do is shock yourself and kill yourself, okay? So be smart. The actual physical Sense unit itself is the little orange box sitting right back here, tucked away neatly behind these wires. When I installed Sense, I had to tuck it away right there because there was no other room within the box. Now, if you install it in your panel, you may have more room at the bottom or the top where you can tuck that, but for me, it works really well right there. It has a couple of connections that run out of it, if you can see it at the very top here. Some of these wires, the two main clamps, will go around the mains. This is a Sense clamp right here. You'll have two clamps that go around the two mains that come into your house. These are directional and they have to be installed the right way. Those two wires then run back into your orange box and they plug in. The Sense draws its power by being plugged directly into a dedicated breaker. Mine travels up and plugs into that breaker right there. Now it draws a very minimal amount of electricity, so it's nothing that you're going to notice on your electric bill. Because I have solar, I have two additional clamps that go around the two wires coming in from my solar array. These are the clamps right here. This is the breaker for my solar. Installing the Sense is as easy as that. You plug two wires into a dedicated breaker, and then you put two clamps around your main. You also have to make room for the Wi-Fi antenna. If your box has enough room, you can just have it sticking right out of the Sense unit itself. Otherwise, it does come with an extension cable. I chose to knock out a hole in the bottom of my breaker panel, and it is actually protruding into the wall behind the drywall. This gives me a clear Wi-Fi signal because that's how the data gets back and forth from the Sense unit. After you have it plugged into the breaker, you have the two clamps going around your main. It turns on, it makes a sweet little noise, and then you jump into the app to program it. It's that easy. If you have solar, you install the two clamps around the solar, and that's it. It's very straightforward. So I'm gonna secure my breaker box back up, and then we're gonna head inside, and I'm gonna give you a run through of the Sense app and show you some of the updates that just came out. So let's start off with some of the things I really like about the app. First and foremost, it does give you real-time energy monitoring. As you see in the upper right-hand corner, that is the energy being used by my house right now. In the upper left-hand corner, that is the amount of solar being generated right now. Beneath that, you have a nice little graph. You can change the colors of the graph between blue, red, yellow, you name it. The yellow-orange curve that is going from left to right, that is my solar production, and the blue line is my real-time energy usage. If you scroll back, you can see history on this, and it will go back as far as you can scroll. Now, you can obviously tell that it takes a little while to load as you keep scrolling back, but The peaks and the valleys are different devices turning on, turning off. The yellow is the solar production. You can zoom this as far back as you want to go, as long as you have a little bit of time to let it load. This is really helpful, and I find it really nice to glance at just at a moment's notice. If I want to see how much energy I'm using, or more importantly for me, how much solar I'm producing, this is the view that I come into. So it does give you a nice bird's eye view of your real-time energy monitoring. After you look at the real-time notifications and the real-time monitoring, you can click on the Devices tab on the bottom right-hand side, and this will give you an individual rundown of every device in your home that the Sense has identified. Now, to date, the Sense has notified 26 different devices within my home. Some of these are very accurate in their description and their sensing, and some of them are not so much. As you can tell, my toaster oven / coffee pot apparently looks very similar to Sense, so when either one of those turns on, it triggers that notification. At the very bottom there, you see, what is this? That is what I renamed a mystery light bulb that I still have no idea what it is, and it hasn't turned on since. So Sense uses what's called machine learning to identify various devices throughout your house, because according to their website, everything that uses electricity has its own sort of pulse or pattern to it, and over time the box gets smarter and it identifies more and more things throughout your house. I'm still getting notifications from this, and it's still sniffing out new devices 5 months after I installed it. Within the first couple of weeks, it found a lot of them, but every couple of days, every couple of weeks, a couple more will trickle in. Just recently, as of actually last week, it found the vacuum cleaner, which I've been using for the last 5 months. So I don't really see a rhyme or reason to this, but it does detect several different devices throughout your house, and lets you show exactly how much electricity they are using when you click on it. My HVAC here, for example, shows that for the past week it's used 4.4 kilowatt hours, and it's been on for 10 hours and 20 minutes. This individual device monitoring helps you understand what is using electricity, and if you need to make changes to your usage patterns to help reduce your electric bill. Another thing that I really like about the Sense is its integration with Kasa or TP-Link. TP-Link offers a smart plug that monitors the energy of whatever's plugged into it, and then this ties directly into the Sense app to help you identify what's what. Sometimes Sense needs a little bit of help identifying what's using your electricity, and by using Kasa or TP-Link smart plugs, you can get just that. You can get some help with it. I also like that within the app, it shows you what's always on. And if you look, the always on category right now is consuming 301 watts. This is consistent of 3 different TP-Link switches. One is for my modem router, one's for my water heater and softener, and the other is for my whole house air circulator. Now, the whole house air circulator was an energy gremlin that I couldn't identify, and the Sense didn't identify it either, despite the fact that it's on 24 hours a day. So by installing a TP-Link switch to it, I know exactly how much electricity that whole house air circulator is using. It's costing me about $106 a year right now. But on top of that, if I decide that I don't need it, I can click the button right from the app, and it's off. There's no need to go into the Kasa app to turn this device on or off again. You can do it all from the Sense app, and it ties in really nicely. Plus, I'm able to see what's actually using the electricity that Sense hasn't actually identified on its own. So it's a nice little integration. Now, the last thing that I really like about the Sense app is the sheer amount of information that you can get from it. Not only does it tell you real time what's being used, what your solar output is, but it gives you a lot of historical reporting. So you can go into charts and graphs, and if you're a geeky guy like me, that's really valuable stuff. So let's just quick go through a couple screens on the Sense app. The first thing that you're looking at is the Now. Now, this is actually something I'm going to cover in the cons, but these are the bubbles. Sense is famous for their little bubbles. In fact, it's part of their advertising, and that it's allegedly supposed to give you a real-time view of what your house is using as well as what your solar production is. The problem with this is, aside from being kind of neat to look at, it doesn't really give a whole lot of information. If you click on something, it gives you the full wattage output, but just from a 1,000-foot view here, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. Now, going into the Trends tab at the bottom, this is where you kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it. The usage at the top left here, this breaks down by day, week, month, year, or your entire bill. It shows you what your usage is, what your solar production is, and then it gives you a breakdown of all the individual things that are using the electricity within your house. By clicking on any of these, it shows you the kilowatt hours as well as the cost. Cost is calculated based on what your kilowatt hour cost is, and you get that information taken from your electric bill. The bottom center is the real-time chart. This is something I'll talk about in the recent update, as this is something that just changed. That button used to never be there before. But this will always take you back to your home screen that shows you your usage, your solar output, and just kind of the neat little up and down graph. From there you go to the devices tab, and this is where it shows you every single device. Everything that Sense has identified, it breaks it down for you, and by clicking on any of them, it will give you a more in-depth look of that individual piece of equipment. So my fish tank setup has cost about $71 per year. Kind of neat. And then of course the bottom right is your settings. This is where you go into your account, your notifications, your home, your general. This is also where you set up your Kasa integration. It's also where you punch in what your cost is per kilowatt hour. You can change your theme from the colors. You can also toggle on dark mode. I prefer dark mode, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm leaving it off just because it is a little easier to see when it's in daylight mode. So that's a quick run through of what the Sense app actually looks like. Now let's talk about some of the cons. All right, so talking about some of the cons built into the Sense app, my biggest gripe is right here on the main screen. The bubbles are useless. This is a cool graphical depiction maybe of what's being used within your house and what you are producing from your solar array, but the problem is the scale on these gets really out of whack if you have a solar system of any given size. If we go into one of my screenshots here, I have a bubble of a solar generation that's 3,700 watts. Look at the difference in this. Look how big the solar bubble is compared to the fish tank, the always on, the main fridge. It's January right now. My solar system is producing about 4,000 watts at peak. In June and July, it will reach about 12 to 13,000 watts. Now, this is to scale. So what it does is it makes that solar bubble so large, everything else just looks like a pinprick right next to it. It's like you're looking at Venus next to the sun. It doesn't tell me anything at that point. So if you don't have a solar system, maybe this will be a little bit more useful for you, but once that solar bubble gets so big, it is literally pointless for me. My second gripe is this. Sense does a really good job at identifying a lot of very key things, but it's also missed a lot of very key things. Almost every night I play PlayStation, I turn on my big screen TV, and it has yet to identify either one of these devices. I have a hard time believing that a PlayStation 4 is something so rare that Sense can't identify its unique signature. The same goes with charging phones, charging laptops, turning on televisions, everyday items that are very, very common in households, it doesn't identify. And I simply don't understand why it can't do that when it can identify a vacuum cleaner, or it can identify a microwave or a pressure cooker or something that gets used maybe once or twice a day or maybe once or twice a week. It's able to pick those up, but not a PlayStation? That just seems kind of weird to me. All right, so here's my biggest complaint about Sense plus solar thus far, and that is unfortunately the solar data portion of it. I love being able to go in and see how much solar energy I'm using or producing right now versus what my home is using. I love to be able to see that in real time. It makes a data geek like me super giddy. But the problem is what it does with that data is hard to follow. So first of all, I have to go into the Trends tab and then click on solar. Now, there used to be a dedicated button at the bottom of the screen just for solar, but I think a lot of people complained because they didn't have solar and they thought it was a waste of real estate. So now it takes me 2 clicks to get there. Not that big of a deal. But once I get in here, I'm greeted with a couple of neat graphics off the top. First of all, look at that. 69% of my house is being powered by solar right now. That's cool. I like it. It then gives you a little graph here that they kind of stole from the Tesla Powerwall that shows, the sun is producing this much. You're using this much in your home. And if I was actually sending some back to the grid, it would show me a nice little arrow that says, oh, you're going back to the grid right there. How cool is that? Once we scroll down though, that's where things get a little bit convoluted. I can see my usage graphs here, sorted by day, week, month, year, or my billing cycle. But the data beneath that is really hard to follow. Example, my production today is 15.8 kilowatt hours so far for about $2. Okay, I get that. My usage so far is 17 kilowatt hours. I'm assuming that means my total usage. However, I've sent 8 kilowatt hours back to the grid, I've pulled 9.2 kilowatt hours from the grid, and my house has been powered by solar 46%. The questions that I have are, what is my net spend for the day? Or what is my net savings for the day? I'm assuming that I have to take my from grid and I have to subtract my to grid to understand that I have pulled 1.2 kilowatt hours from the grid, and that's my net. So if I take the dollar minus the dollar, I'm at a 0 right now, which obviously there's some sense in there that it's not calculating. But what I don't understand is, why can't they just list that? Here's your net total cost for the day, or here's your net total savings, the check you're gonna get back for today. Many days I'll overproduce what I use and I'll get money back for that. Why not just tell me that? Why do I have to do the math to understand what I'm getting back? And on top of that, I might not even be right with that assumption. I'm literally just guessing at this. And then my production, my usage, none of these things actually add up. If I'm at 1.2 net kilowatt hours, is that my production, my usage? Am I doing more math there? Because if I do my total usage minus my production, that gives me 1.2 as well. So I guess that matches the from grid and the to grid. But why not just tell me that? I hate having to do math when I should just be able to look at it, boom, right away. Also, 46% powered by solar. That doesn't add up to anything, because if you're telling me that I've only have 1.2 kilowatt hours I pulled from the grid, that I've had a lot more powered by solar for the day. So is that just a time of day thing? I have no idea. Now the power meter down beneath it, that's pretty cool because it shows you 24 hours of the power meter, and if you stretch it out, you can see your spikes. You know, your solar went up, your solar went down. I was obviously doing laundry, which is what those big blue spikes are. That was the dryer kicking on and off. But the data, unfortunately, just isn't there yet. Don't even get me started on the reporting that you can pull from Sense. It'll send it to you in a nice CSV file, but good luck trying to decipher that. It's just pages upon pages of numbers with no rhyme or reason to it. So my biggest gripe is that the whole reason I bought Sense was to help monitor my solar, and it does an okay job at it in a real-time perspective, but from an aggregate week-long, month-long, year-long perspective, it's kind of hit and miss. Okay, so the very last gripe that I'll talk about with Sense is how it actually lets my solar system deduct from my solar usage when the panels are not being used at night. Here's what I mean. During the night, my solar panels don't produce. That makes sense. But if you check in the upper left-hand corner here, it shows I'm at negative 17 watts. Well, how is that? It's not like my panels are beaming electricity off into space. But unfortunately, the IQ combiner and all of the microinverters do draw a tiny little amount of electricity for the blinking lights, the computer, those sorts of things. And it draws about 17 watts when the panels are not producing electricity. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but Sense actually counts that as turning the solar meter backwards. And if you look at the chart here, from about 5 p.m. until about 8 a.m., there was no sun. That's 15 hours where it shows me negative 17, negative 18 watts. Over the course of a month, that's gonna come out to 7 or 8 kilowatt hours that it's deducting from my solar production to give me a total number, and that's not right. If I look at my Enphase app, it tells me here's how much solar you produced, period. Because that number, that 17 watts, that is included in my total watts used at that moment in time. So looking at the screen here, it shows me 1,020 watts being used at this moment in time at 7:17 p.m. That negative 17 watts the solar's drawing, that's included in that number as well. So why is it showing me that again? And then when you look at it at the end of the month, the solar numbers are wrong. They're not accounting for this, and it's showing me I'm 7 to 8 kilowatt hours shy from what my inverters actually have been producing. I shouldn't get docked for when the microinverters and the combiner aren't using electricity. It shouldn't roll that solar meter backwards. It should cap it at 0 so it doesn't affect my total month's production. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments below if you want me to explain a little bit more. All right, enough rambling about the things that make me a little bit shy about recommending Sense 100%. Let's talk about some of the things that have changed in the most recent version of the app. As I previously said, in the app, if we go back to one of the previous builds here, this is a screenshot of what it used to look like. The biggest noticeable difference is down the very bottom. The solar used to be right there. Now, I liked this, like I said previously, because it was one button to get to solar, and I'm there. I could see all my data just with a single click. That being gone now, I have to go through a couple different button clicks. Not that big of a deal. The now portion down there had at the very top the toggle between your button, or your bubbles. Get that out of the way. Your bubbles and your real-time graph. That's where you would toggle that. In the current build, you simply go to the now to see your bubbles, or you go to the real-time chart button right there on its own. So they have separated that, and they've taken away the solar button. I guess the ask that people had was they wanted to be able to get to this graph at any given point without having to go back and toggle through some things. And I get that, I suppose. I'm just nitpicking at this point, but that's the biggest change in this update, in this release, as well as the release prior to it. In the last release we got before the one from this week, it actually added this entire solar section we're looking at right here. And again, I really like this graph at the top that shows, hey, here's what the sun's using, here's what the grid's pulling, or what your house is using. I really appreciate that. These are really cool graphical representations, and part of the reason why I bought it. It also gave us a little bit more of the data here. These data points that I kind of went off on a little bit ago, these came in the last update to the app. So if you find these usable, great. I think they still have a little bit more work to go. And then they also moved the power meter to the bottom of this screen as well. So a couple of UI changes and a couple of different tweaks based on some of the feedback they got in some forums, I believe. Those are the biggest changes that we've seen in Sense in this most current version, and then the one before that, which actually had a bunch of changes to solar. So that's it. The big question becomes, do I recommend Sense? And the answer is absolutely, with a few caveats. Buy a Sense for not only what it is today, but for what it can be in the future. The changes that Sense has made in just the 7 months that I've owned it have been huge. They've added some features, they've really expanded on their solar section, and they keep developing it. The development team at Sense sends out a newsletter every quarter, and they talk about some of the things they're working on and then some of the things that are coming. And it seems like they're listening to a lot of the community feedback, and they're adding things to it every month almost. So absolutely get a Sense if you want to get a good idea of what your home is using, as well as what your solar is producing. Don't buy a Sense thinking that it's going to identify everything in your house and that you'll be able to say, hey, shut this thing off or turn that thing on and save us some money. It's not that accurate quite yet. It keeps learning over time and it gets better over time, but don't buy it thinking that it's going to solve your high energy bill in one fell swoop, because it won't. You will absolutely get a better idea of where you're spending your money and where your solar is making your money, but it's not going to cure every question that you may have, so don't buy it thinking that it's going to. So that wraps up this episode of Don't Burn the House Down. I'll put some links in the description below if you decide you want to purchase a Sense or the TP-Link switches. As always, these are Amazon affiliate links, so anything that you do happen to purchase helps to support the channel and hopefully make more videos like this. I hope you found it entertaining and informational, and thanks for watching.